Hey, all right then. Let's kick in some more on the last of this treatment and problems issues. One way to reduce drug-related harm is pay for drugs in cash, take more than one drug at a time, or decrease frequency of use. Hope it's obvious. Decrease frequency of use. Another sample item. A harm reduction therapist might ask if a heroin injector wants to A. Snort coke with the heroin, B. Try to use more frequently, C. Switch to smoking heroin, D. Switch to decaf. I guess switch to decaf would be quite the serious harm reduction, but probably wouldn't qualify or be even a reasonable switch. But switch to smoking heroin, right? An alternative way of using that's got lower risk for blood-borne illness is certainly consistent with harm reduction. All right, let's get into the treatment. I'm not going to spend too much time on stuff we've already covered in the motivational interviewing section, but want to make sure you hammer home that take-home message. The therapeutic relationship is definitely the mechanism of action. This is what really seems to be going on. Lots and lots of really disparate therapies all seem to have certain things in common, and that may be part of the issue. The important thing is they're going to support not only the reduction of problems, but also client growth. And what do these rely on? Primarily empathy, warmth, and genuineness. So empathy concerns the ability to identify with another person's feelings. Literally, I get you. I'm not sure what it's like to be you, but I've definitely had feelings like those feelings. The warmth is hard to operationalize, but you know it when you see it. It suggests a generally good-natured approach, a sincere appreciation of the client's situation. Just a good-hearted person, shall we say. And finally, genuineness. Again, another one that's kind of hard to operationalize, but rises from an authentic, trustworthy, realistic set of behaviors. And then if it's consistent with a therapist's attitude, values, and goals, or at least it seems that way, and respects the client's attitudes, values, and goals, that's going to go well. So a combination of different methods seems to help for guided self-change, but it's not just psychological treatments, it's letting it dovetail with sociologically informed ones and biologically informed ones should the need arise. We did a whole big section on motivational interviewing, but this is really the take-home message. We're going to have brief, client-focused interactions with a therapist, and they decrease problems with an astounding efficacy. So it's funny because you can have what Bill Miller called, they've got the words but not the music. Some people are doing the actual behaviors, they're doing the reflections, they're saying the right things, but it just doesn't quite have the feeling. And that's often because they're not doing the non-specifics. They're not getting at the warmth, the empathy, and the genuineness. And that's what I mean by the non-specifics. If that's not there, emitting the right operants just isn't going to make much of a difference. So as we talked about before, pretty much throughout, we're going to express empathy, literally just get this across. Some folks call it accurate empathy, using those reflective listening skills, make it clear you understand how the client is feeling. We're developing that discrepancy. We talked about amplified and double-sided. Those are particularly relevant reflections for developing this discrepancy, but clients essentially going to face this disparity between stated attitudes, beliefs, goals, values, and actual behavior. Rolling with resistance. So rather than argue back and forth, the client is going to view resistance as an opportunity to take a different approach. If the client is bristling, do literally anything else. Shut up. Ask an open-ended question. Reflect. Summarize. And then support self-efficacy. Any statement that sounds as if the client thinks he or she can do the task, by all means, if it sounds realistic, reinforce that. And then what does this rely on? That readiness to change. We talked about measuring it, but really it's a construct that's going to ebb and flow, right? Sometimes you're going to be up for it. Sometimes you're not going to have it. That's okay too, right? Bottom line is go at it when you're ready, and then make sure whatever interventions you use in the treatment are aligned with where the client is as far as readiness is concerned. So I had the special note just on readiness to change and therapist goals. The clients are going to come in with certain irrational beliefs, shall we say, certain maladaptive thoughts. And therapists have these too, right? So if you can't examine your own irrational thoughts, your own maladaptive cognitions, you're not going to be able to detect what's going wrong, and you're going to end up getting kind of deflated, kind of worn out. So keeping an eye on your own cognitions is what makes a clinician a good clinician. And then finally, interventions tailored to motivation. So there's no need to jump ahead of the level of motivation that the client has. Ideally, you're going to be completely aligned, and we'll walk through really quickly again. I didn't do stages of change on this one, but the notion is pretty much the same. As folks move up in readiness, we're going to have different interventions that seem appropriate. So folks who are low in readiness to change, the pre-contemplation notion, they're still going to have an opportunity to make good use of the time, even if it's just by using assessment, right? Just going to ask about drug use, consequences, see if they put it together. Folks who are ambivalent about change, right? They're definitely considering it. They're certainly more than the pre-contemplators, but they have not made any kind of commitment and may not have even articulated the pros and cons, and then that's what you're going to move to. You're going to go to that decisional balance, let them weigh out their perceptions of the costs and benefits. So literally, this goes back to some social psych stuff from the 70s. Started out with work on getting people to floss, if you can believe it or not. But the technique is you're going to look at all the costs and benefits of change, encourage a client to list the pros and cons, let the client sort of weigh and measure what really matters, what's going to make a difference, how important is this, how much do they see it. And then I do want to talk a little more about how they see it, because the envisioning notion is, I say here, a frequent phenomenon that has received little attention is envisioning. Those client comments that reveal some projection into the future without problematic drug use, right? Once they start asking the questions like, well, I'm not committing, but what if, right? That's essentially getting a look at what the future would look like if these behaviors were different. Who would my friends be? Where would I go? What would I do with my free time? How would I feel? What would I do when I'm upset? All those kinds of things. And the chance is there to let the client imagine that. Let the client describe that. Ask for permission and see if you can chime in on it. And then lo and behold, that might change the weights on the pros and cons so that readiness tends to increase. Clients with increased readiness to change often begin with a clearly stated desire, right? It's that, oh man, I know things have got to change. Oh man, I can't keep this up anymore, right? And that alone is a good sign. And then my hope is they'll be willing to make that public commitment. That's a real sign of readiness. Well, so as their commitment is increasing, we're going to go ahead and get into a change strategy. Odds are high. The client's got a great idea. The client knows exactly what has to happen. So this change strategy is going to just be a brainstorming, spitballing session between the motivational interviewer and the client. But I do want to get into some behavioral and some cognitive strategies. And now we're essentially transitioning into cognitive behavioral therapy for substance abuse problems, but there's no sense in getting into these if the motivation isn't already there. So one good one from classical conditioning: avoid classically conditioned stimuli. Generally, folks don't want to be around the paired cues that have been with the drug so much. As an alternative, at least inpatient, folks have had good luck doing cue exposure, literally on purpose, going for these classically conditioned stimuli and repeatedly pairing the cues in the absence of the drug to watch the tolerance will drop, but you're hoping they don't even get to measure that. The craving and the urges and things like that will drop in response to the cues as well. Alternative activity. So a classic behavioral activation approach, we'll talk about this in the antidepressants lecture as well. Basically, we're going to increase activities that are pleasant, especially if they are incompatible with drug use. So if a lot of the drug use has been motivated by poor mood, going out and doing fun things is a splendid way to intervene. It doesn't have to be party all the time. It just has to be get stuff done that's consistent with your values so you can feel good about it at the end of the day. And then finally, we're going to move into some of the more cognitive. It's primarily about altering beliefs. So there's a subset of beliefs, often drug-related ones, that reveal what's going to be a good target if you're going to have a cognitive bent to your treatment. Basically, we're going to train clients on how to challenge the ideas that are either incorrect or maladaptive. What do I mean? The only way to have fun is with drugs, right? Really, the only way to have fun is with drugs, right? And through that reflection process, giving them the opportunity to respond to the idea themselves, go out and gather data, see if they can have fun without drugs, and away it goes. So once clients identify a thought or a belief that they suspect is less than ideal, they can challenge the belief through questions. So they'll end up being their own little Socratic questioner, right? They'll ask themselves, hey, what is this coming from? Is this true? What is the evidence? And working from there. Another potential strategy, let's alter beliefs by listing or recalling benefits of not using. So some folks literally walk around with that list of benefits in their wallet or purse or on their phone or something like that. And then the chance to basically do that pros and cons again if they're noticing they're at high risk for relapse, otherwise tempted. Altering beliefs by reviewing or recalling negative consequences. So the other side of it, basically. So not only are there benefits to staying sober, let's go ahead and recall all the prices you paid from the problematic drug use. And then in part because these are so comorbid with anxiety and depression, well, so are these maladaptive cognitions. So we'll get into it more when we do the psychiatric meds, but things like dichotomous thinking. If it's ain't one thing, it's another, right? Either it's perfect or it's terrible, right? Either I'm a winner or I'm a loser, right? Either this is the greatest thing ever or it's absolutely horrible, right? These are the kinds of thoughts that are not true and often lead to the affect, either anxiety or depression, that is going to essentially put you at risk for relapse. And then finally, they're implementing change, right? They're basically in the action stage now. Once clients regularly alter old behaviors in favor of new ones, they are essentially taking real steps towards change, right? And there's going to be this period where they're doing it, but they may not have the self-efficacy. They may not quite have that feeling that they got it licked. It's just that this is them doing the best they can under the circumstances until finally they reach more of a maintenance. So after a steady period of new behaviors, clients may report increased confidence in their skills. That's what I mean by the self-efficacy. they're in that maintenance stage, and then drawing the distinction between lapse and relapse. So rather than calling a minor slip a relapse, right? Let's say that was a whoops, a slip up in maintenance. And then calling it a lapse kind of includes this as a possibility even beforehand. Not that you want a self-fulfilling prophecy, but just to say, hey, if this does happen, it happens sometimes, you can get right back on the horse. Whereas a relapse would be a more elaborate return to the problem behavior, one that includes a longer duration, right? All right, a 3-day bender, something like that, right? Then call that relapse if that's going to be motivating. But the bottom line is, let's get back to the stages of change. Let's get back to the behaviors that were relevant to decreasing the problems. Couple of key topics that are important to know for this, not only for lapse prevention, but for relapse prevention, is the abstinence violation effect. My friend Al Marlatt, who wrote the foreword of Understanding Marijuana book, came up with this notion, the abstinence violation effect. Basically, somebody has a small slip. They either use a small amount when they said they weren't going to, or they go over their stated limit, and then they say, well, I made the small mistake, so I might as well just use more, right? Oh, I wasn't going to have any chocolate. I already had a bite, so now I'm going to eat the whole cake, that kind of thing. And that abstinence violation effect is startling. And once you know about it, you basically have called the room, so to speak. You've made it so that you can identify it. So when it does happen, if you do have a little slip, you won't let this fire up. And then another really important predictor Alan also went into was what he called apparently irrelevant decisions. And do know these 3 words. I know it's conceptually easy, but go ahead and know this expression. These are small, seemingly minor thoughts and actions that actually increase the probability of a lapse. Right? So the client says, I don't know what happened. I was at work, and the next thing I knew, I was smoking crack. Right? And then you walk through, and it's like, well, I was at work, right? And then I could have gotten paid in cash, or I could have gotten a check. And I went ahead and got the cash. It doesn't seem like a big decision, but guess what? Now you got all this cash burning in your pocket, right? And then I was going to drive slow and take the highway, but, I can't stand the traffic. And I thought, it's a nice day. Maybe I'll just take the surface streets. Again, doesn't seem like a big deal, but taking the surface streets, then you end up in the old neighborhood. And then you see a car like the old dealer's car. And it's just each one of these little decisions all adds up. Like the rudder on a ship turning just a little bit and then sending the whole ship far away. Well, how do we plan for these? How can we prepare? We're going to identify high-risk situations ahead of time, right? Rather than waiting until you have a lapse, think about what were the times that were hard in the past. What were the times that were most likely to predict use when you were really heavy into it, right? And what we're going to do with this is the functional analysis. What's going on with the functional analysis? Literally going to say, okay, what happened before? What happened during? What happened after? And chain that even, go back as many steps as you need to see what really predicts the predictors of the high-risk situations, right? So you end up intervening earlier and earlier so people don't end up in these difficult, tempting situations. The functional analysis basically tells you what are the situations that are going to be problematic, and then you can make plans for those ahead of time to either avoid them or deal with them. All right? A handful of alternative self-help groups to discuss. All right? We won't get into 12-step facilitation too much on this particular video. I'm going to devote the next one to it a little more, and we'll also get into some of the pharmacological interventions that actually do have some reasonable empirical support. Okay? Good work.